The definition of paraphilic disorder can be described as any intense and persistent sexual interest, other than sexual interest, in genital stimulation or preparatory fondling, with phenotypically normal, physically mature, consenting humans. To put that into easier terms, sexual behavior is frowned upon and often not talked about, even though everyone has the biological sex drive. This disorder stems from that drive. Sexual behavior can be associated with emotional expression, emotional bonding, and recreational activity. Normal sexual behavior is being attracted to someone, typically human, and typically someone your age and has the same interests. Some individuals' sex drive is extremely different. These individuals go through the same sex drive as we do, but for children. They are often called pedophiles. Their specific sex drive is called sexual deviations. Most people that have these specific sex drives are marked as criminals because a lot of their behavior or their thought about behavior is criminal. Some are not criminal, but go through a lot of distress and work to lessen their needs and their wants to have these imaginations or do these sexual acts. The DSM states that paraphilias need to see or imagine unusual sexual acts for sexual excitements. These imagery or unusual acts are extremely repetitive and persistent. These unusual images and acts involve non-human objects, sexual activity with a human that involves suffering, and sexual activity with a non-consulting partner. Paraphilic disorders can also be satisfied from watching self-harm or inflicting self-harm on others. Although there isn't a lot of history on these disorders, there's two men that have either contributed research or been a part of the finding of the disorder. The two men are William J. Robinson and Sigmund Freud. The term paraphilia was coined by William J. Robinson, a urologist at the time. Paraphilia was researched by many individuals, but the most well-known psychologist that researched it was Sigmund Freud. Causes of paraphilic disorder can vary, but the most specific one and the most common one is relationships within early childhood, because these, if they go wrong or there is molestation involved, then these can really affect an adult and affect their sexual behavior, especially if there's sexual behaviors involved with adults when you're a younger child. Along with the causes, there are symptoms of paraphilic disorder. One of the symptoms is flashing or showing genitals. This can be illegal, especially if you are flashing a complete stranger without them having any idea it's happening. Another symptom is fetishism, which is where people have specific things that motivate their sex drive. For example, a piece of clothing could be a fetish. Frotteurism is the rubbing of someone else's genitals in public. The last symptom is pedophilia, and this is fantasies or urges for sexual acts with children. This could include pornography or actual sexual acts or imagining it. So if I were going to treat paraphilic disorder, I would treat it with therapy or medicine, or them combined. This disorder also involves medical components, psychological components, and sociocultural components. So if I was going to treat this disorder medically, there would be only one better way to do it. This way is getting a drug that will reduce the testosterone. Two examples are Androderm and Navid. Reducing the testosterone reduces the sexual drive to make sexual behaviors. While medication will work, it is not a cure and most likely will need to be combined with a form of therapy. So if I were going to treat this without medication, I would use a variation of different therapies. One therapy is victim identification. This is useful for individuals with different branches of paraphilia. This uses role reversal to let the person understand what harm they are doing on others. So this sheds light on the harm they're doing to others so that they can kind of look at it from another person's point of view, and this makes them regret what they're doing and makes them feel almost disgusted by what they're doing. Another way I would help an individual with paraphilic disease through therapy is covert conditioning. This is a behavioral method where the client imagines feeling shame and distress when friends and family members observe what they have been doing. This helps find the behavior a lot less pleasurable for the person experiencing it. Another therapy that is used to help treat paraphilic disorders is averse therapies. This therapy pairs the thing that arouses them with shock or something unpleasant. So it's like when you have a food that every time you eat it, you throw up. So every time you think of the food, it makes you want to throw up. So this is kind of how averse therapies work. The last therapy I would use to help people with paraphilic disorders is group therapy. This is where they take responsibility for their actions. It involves victim impact and empathy. The group of people causes a different kind of support system for the person experiencing these feelings. This also helps with family support, building relationship skills, and cognitive reconstruction. The community reacts extremely poorly to people with paraphilic disorders or to the idea of paraphilic disorders because it can be thought of as criminal behavior. Most of the people with paraphilic disorder are men, and 52% of men had at least one lifetime unconventional sexual behavior. The most popular paraphilic behaviors or acts that people were imagining or acting upon were voyeurism, and that was 13%, and fetishism, and that was 13%. Laws and regulations having to do with this disorder is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of people will relate paraphilic disorders and criminal behavior because paraphilic disorders has to do with pedophilia, which is illegal, and flashing, which can be illegal, and watching people harm themselves or harming yourselves, which can be illegal. But in many places, they're still trying to separate those two and understand that as well as it is hurting people and it can be hurtful to children and adults, it is also a mental disorder and it needs to be separated. A notorious person for this disorder is Harvey Weinstein. He actually checked himself into a rehabilitation clinic for sex addiction. He has many alleged assaults. Many people say that there's about 20. This coincides with paraphilic disorder because a lot of people, along with their sex drive, like to see people harm themselves or harm others. Life within the eyes of someone with this disorder can be extremely chaotic. First of all, there are many different branches of this disorder. The first one is transvestic disorder. This engages in cross-dressing with a lot of distress. The next branch of this disorder is exhibitionistic disorder. This is where people derive pleasure from exposing genitals to an unsuspecting person. The next branch of this disorder is fetishistic disorder and partialism. Fetishism is a sexual arousal from objects, such as a piece of clothing. Partialism is sexually arousing fantasies of rubbing up against someone. The next one is sexual masochism. This is being aroused by being made to suffer. The next branch is paraphilic disorder. This is sexual arousal from children. The next branch is sexual sadism. This is being aroused by inflicting suffering onto someone. The last branch is voyeuristic disorder. This derives sexual pleasure from observing an unsuspecting person who is engaged in a sexual behavior. So with all that said, seeing life through the eyes of someone with this disorder can involve many different aspects. Constant urges to imagine these sexual acts, act upon these sexual acts, flash other people, involve other people. Another thing is this has to do with a criminal background. So If you have this disorder, you're most likely deemed as a criminal, and that can be really hurtful. The other thing is your mind racing. So this causes your mind to race because you want to have these urges, but you also are embarrassed and really, really ashamed of the urges and the sexual urges you have. Another one is the ability to complete normal tasks. So going to somewhere where there's a lot of children could be very hard for you because you don't want to give in to those urges, so you might have to avoid places like that. Another place is just any normal place where it could be easy for you to inflict harm in others because your thoughts could be telling you you might want to do that. This can also really affect relationships. So, especially with children, it would be hard to have kids if you're having these shameful thoughts about children in a sexual way. This can also affect family because they won't exactly understand where you're coming from. This can lead to loneliness and can really affect a person's mental health even deeper.